At a wildlife facility in North Carolina, something was happening that defied everything we know about one of America's most solitary predators. When 3 orphaned bobcat kittens met a severely injured adult male named Atlas, an impossible bond began to form. While other bobcats scattered into isolation as nature intended, this pack of 4, a one-eyed mentor, a shy survivor, a snack thief, and a warrior heart, all walked the same path. They hunted cooperatively, a behavior unheard of in bobcats, sharing territory and communicating in ways that left experts speechless. Their rescuer, Margaret, was stunned. She'd never seen bobcats like this. What had happened when they met? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, jarring Margaret Sullivan from the deepest part of her sleep. After 32 years as a licensed wildlife rehabilitator in the mountains of North Carolina, she'd learned to recognize the particular quality of desperation in a caller's voice that meant the difference between life and death for an animal. "There's been a vehicle strike on Highway 441, the voice said, trembling. It was Tom Bradley, a park ranger she'd worked with countless times before. Adult female bobcat. She didn't make it, but Margaret, she was lactating. We need to find those kittens." Margaret was already pulling on her boots, her mind racing through calculations. March meant the kittens would be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks old. In the brutal cold of an Appalachian spring night, they had hours at most. She grabbed her rescue kit, thermal imaging camera, handling gloves, carriers lined with heating pads, emergency formula she always kept mixed and ready, and headed into the darkness. The story of North American bobcats isn't one of near extinction like their Iberian lynx cousins, but rather a quieter crisis of fragmentation and human encroachment. Once ranging freely across the continent, bobcats have watched their world shrink piece by piece. In the southeast, where Margaret operated her rehabilitation center, development had carved the mountain wilderness into islands of habitat connected by increasingly dangerous corridors. Every year, more bobcats fell victim to vehicles, rat poison, and the simple inability to find territory that wasn't already claimed by roads, houses, and shopping centers. Margaret had dedicated her life to these animals after a transformative encounter in 1992. Fresh out of veterinary school and working in a small animal practice in Asheville, she'd been called to assist with an injured bobcat kit found crying beside its dead mother. The kit, barely 4 weeks old, had gripped her finger with surprising strength. Its blue eyes, they're born with blue eyes that later turn yellow, looking at her with what she could only describe as trust. She'd nursed that kit back to health, learned the intricate process of wildlife rehabilitation, and never looked back. That first bobcat, whom she'd named Scout, was successfully released after 6 months of care. Margaret had tracked him through trail cameras for 3 more years, watching him claim territory, hunt, and eventually mate. It proved what was possible. Now, threading her truck through the winding mountain roads in pre-dawn darkness, she thought about the hundreds of bobcats that had passed through her facility, each one teaching her something new about resilience, about the delicate balance between intervention and nature, about the heartbreaking choices that came with trying to save wild lives in an increasingly unwild world. Tom was waiting at mile marker 47, his flashlight beam cutting through the light fog. The female bobcat's body had already been moved. Protocol demanded quick removal to prevent other animals from being struck while scavenging. But Tom had marked the spot. Margaret pulled out the thermal camera and began scanning the slope above the road. Bobcat mothers typically den in rocky crevices, hollow logs, or thick brush piles, usually within a quarter-mile of water sources. This stretch of highway cut through prime denning habitat. "There," she whispered, catching a heat signature about 60 feet up the slope. Then another, and another. 3 kittens huddled together in a shallow cave formed by 2 fallen boulders. Margaret's heart sank even as it soared. 3 kittens meant triple the work, triple the formula, triple the challenge of raising them wild enough to release. But 3 alive was better than 3 dead. The extraction took patience. The kittens, about 4 weeks old, judging by their size and the fact their eyes were open, hissed and spat with impressive ferocity for creatures that weighed less than 2 pounds each. Margaret worked methodically, using her extensive knowledge of bobcat behavior. She knew that at this age they were mobile but not fast, defensive but not truly dangerous. She also knew that every second of human contact was a risk, not of injury to her, but of habituation for them. Back at her rehabilitation facility, a converted barn on 40 acres of protected land funded by donations and her own veterinary practice income, Margaret faced the decision that haunted every wildlife rehabilitator: how much to intervene. The kittens were dehydrated. One had a minor wound on its hind leg, likely from scrambling over rocks, and all 3 were beginning to show signs of hypothermia despite the relatively mild night. She could follow strict protocols: minimal contact, feeding through a barrier, no comfort beyond basic survival needs. Or she could give them the maternal care their mother would have provided, risking attachment but potentially saving their lives. Margaret chose what she always chose: a careful middle ground born of experience and compassion. The first 72 hours were critical. Margaret set up a nursery in the quarantine section of her facility, maintaining the temperature at a steady 85 degrees. She wore a ghillie suit during feedings, a camouflage covering that broke up her human outline, and never spoke in their presence. The kittens, 2 females and a male, initially refused the bottle. This was common. The nipple didn't feel right. The formula didn't smell like mother. But hunger eventually won, and by the second night, all 3 were nursing vigorously. Margaret named them only in her private notes, never speaking the names aloud. Luna and Sage, the females, and Jasper, the male. Luna was the smallest but fiercest, always first to the bottle despite having to fight past her larger siblings. Sage was cautious, observant, waiting to see what the others did before committing. Jasper was bold but clumsy, often tumbling over his own feet in his eagerness to explore their enclosure. As the weeks passed, Margaret documented everything with the meticulousness of a scientist and the devotion of a parent. Weight gains, behavioral developments, first solid foods. She started them on finely chopped rabbit and chicken, later transitioning to whole prey items. She installed cameras to monitor them 24 hours a day, watching from her house as they played, fought, and learned the essential skills of being bobcats. At 8 weeks, she made a decision that would define the rest of their rehabilitation. She would keep them together but introduce a radical element to their care. Margaret had, over the years, developed relationships with several permanently non-releasable bobcats who lived at her facility. These were animals who, due to injuries or excessive human habituation from being illegally kept as pets, could never return to the wild, but could serve as educators and, in cases like this, surrogate parents. The candidate she chose was Artemis, a 12-year-old female who had lost her left front leg in a steel trap but had successfully raised 2 litters before her injury. Artemis was housed in a large, natural enclosure adjacent to the nursery. Margaret created a small opening between the enclosures, just large enough for the kittens to pass through but too small for Artemis. What happened next was something Margaret had hoped for but never quite expected. Artemis, who had been without kittens for 8 years, immediately began calling to them, a specific churring sound mother bobcats make to their young. Luna was first to investigate, creeping through the opening with her belly low to the ground. Artemis, despite being a stranger to these kittens, groomed Luna with a gentleness that brought tears to Margaret's eyes as she watched on the monitor. Within a week, all 3 kittens were spending most of their time with Artemis. She taught them things Margaret never could: how to properly stalk, the patience needed for a successful ambush, the social dynamics of wild cats. Even with only 3 legs, Artemis could still demonstrate the fluid movement and precise timing that marked an efficient predator. The kittens learned to compensate for her disability, unconsciously developing skills that would serve them well in navigating imperfect terrain in the wild. But the truly unbelievable part of this story began when the kittens were about 4 months old. Margaret had started preparing for their eventual release, beginning the process of reducing human contact even further and introducing them to the large pre-release enclosure. A full acre of natural habitat enclosed with specialty fencing that included trees, rocks, a stream, and live prey. It was then that another call came. This time from a wildlife officer in Tennessee, just over the state line. A young adult male bobcat had been found caught in a fence, severely injured and near death. The officer, Sarah Morrison, had heard about Margaret's success with rehabilitation and drove 4 hours to deliver the cat. The male, whom Margaret designated Patient 47B in her records but privately thought of as Atlas, was in critical condition. Beyond the severe lacerations from the fence, he was emaciated, dehydrated, and blood tests revealed he was fighting a significant infection. Margaret estimated him to be about 14 months old. Dispersal age, when young bobcats leave their mother's territory to establish their own. This dangerous journey, made more perilous by human development, claimed many young bobcats. Margaret housed Atlas in the medical ward, far from the kittens to prevent disease transmission. For 2 weeks, she fought for his life. Intravenous fluids, antibiotics, careful wound management, and slowly increasing nutrition. Atlas was touch and go for days, several times seeming on the verge of giving up. But something, perhaps the wild spirit that defines all bobcats, kept him fighting. As Atlas recovered, Margaret faced a dilemma. He was young enough that release was still possible, but his injuries had left him weakened. He needed time to rebuild muscle, relearn hunting skills, and most importantly, regain the confidence essential for survival in the wild. But keeping him isolated during recovery risked depression and further deterioration. Then came the morning that changed everything. Margaret arrived at the facility to find Luna, the smallest of the orphaned kittens, pressed against the fence nearest Atlas's enclosure. The 2 cats were chirping to each other, a sound Margaret had rarely heard between unrelated bobcats. Over the following days, this behavior continued. Sage and Jasper showed mild interest in Atlas, but Luna seemed absolutely fascinated. After extensive consultation with colleagues and careful health screening to ensure Atlas posed no disease risk, Margaret made an unconventional decision. She created a supervised introduction space, a neutral enclosure where Atlas and the 3 kittens could interact with multiple escape routes and hiding spots for safety. The first meeting was tense. Atlas, despite his weakened state, was still a wild adult male who could potentially harm the 5-month-old kittens. But instead of aggression, Margaret witnessed something extraordinary. Atlas approached the kittens with cautious curiosity. Jasper and Sage kept their distance, but Luna walked right up to him, rubbed against his legs, and began grooming his injured shoulder. Atlas's transformation was remarkable. Within days of being introduced to the kittens, his appetite improved dramatically. He began playing, actually playing, something Margaret had never seen in an adult rehabilitation case. He was gentle with the kittens, allowing them to pounce on him, teaching them advanced hunting techniques that even Artemis couldn't demonstrate. But it was the bond between Atlas and Luna that defied everything Margaret knew about bobcat behavior. They became inseparable within the enclosure, hunting cooperatively, a behavior essentially unheard of in solitary bobcats outside of mating pairs or mothers with kittens. Luna seemed to understand Atlas's weaknesses from his injuries and would drive prey toward him. Atlas, in turn, protected Luna from the occasional aggression of her larger siblings. As autumn approached, Margaret faced the most difficult decision of her career. The kittens were now 8 months old. Atlas had recovered remarkably, and all 4 cats were displaying the skills necessary for survival. But could she release them together? Conventional wisdom said no. Bobcats are solitary, territorial animals. Releasing them together might cause conflict or prevent them from establishing proper territories. Yet what she was witnessing suggested something different. These cats had formed a survival coalition, something occasionally seen in other felids but virtually undocumented in bobcats. After weeks of deliberation and consultation with bobcat experts across the country, Margaret decided to attempt something unprecedented, a coordinated release that would allow the cats to choose their own path. The release site was carefully chosen, a 50,000-acre wilderness area in western North Carolina, where a recent conservation easement had created connected habitat corridors. Margaret and her team spent weeks preparing, setting up feeding stations with camera traps, identifying water sources, and mapping potential den sites. Each cat was fitted with a GPS collar that would track their movements for the next 18 months. Release day came in October, the trees blazing with autumn color. Sarah Morrison, the officer who had rescued Atlas, drove up from Tennessee to witness it. Tom Bradley was there too, along with several volunteers who had helped with the countless feeding shifts and enclosure cleanings over the months. Margaret opened the carriers in sequence: Jasper first, then Sage, then Atlas, and finally Luna. Jasper shot out and disappeared into the underbrush immediately. Sage took her time, sniffing the air before melting into the forest shadows. Atlas emerged slowly, his muscles tense, ready for whatever came next. Luna was last. She stepped out of her carrier and immediately went to Atlas. They touched noses, a brief moment of connection, before Atlas turned and loped into the forest. Luna followed. The GPS data over the following months told a story that rewrote textbooks on bobcat behavior. Jasper, true to normal bobcat patterns, established a territory about 3 miles from the release site. Sage claimed an adjacent territory with minimal overlap. But Atlas and Luna remained together for 3 months, sharing territory, hunting cooperatively, before gradually establishing overlapping but distinct ranges. Camera trap footage showed them meeting regularly at territorial boundaries, sometimes hunting together, sometimes just sitting in proximity. A bobcat friendship that challenged everything we thought we knew about these solitary predators. Even more remarkably, when Luna had her first litter the following spring, fathered by an unrelated wild male. Atlas was photographed near her den site, apparently tolerated as a non-threat to the kittens. Margaret published her observations in the Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation, sparking intense debate in the scientific community. Some dismissed it as an anomaly caused by human intervention. Others saw it as evidence of behavioral plasticity in bobcats, an ability to adapt their social structures when circumstances demanded it. The story spread beyond scientific circles. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. The image of Luna and Atlas touching noses in the forest became iconic, a symbol of resilience and adaptation in the face of a changing world. Donations poured into Margaret's rehabilitation center, allowing her to expand operations and save more animals. But for Margaret, sitting in her office late at night, reviewing the latest GPS data showing all 4 bobcats thriving in the wild 18 months post-release, the lesson was simpler and more profound. Every wild animal that came through her doors carried the potential for the extraordinary. Each rescue was a gamble against overwhelming odds, a drain on resources, emotional and financial, that sometimes seemed impossible to sustain. Yet here was proof that the gamble was worth it. Not just in the 4 lives saved, but in what those lives revealed about the natural world's capacity for surprise, adaptation, and resilience. Luna and Atlas had shown that even in species we think we fully understand, there are mysteries waiting to be discovered. Behaviors that emerge when traditional patterns are disrupted, and bonds that form across the boundaries we've drawn in our field guides and textbooks. Margaret thought about that first Bobcat kit, Scout, all those years ago. She wondered what he would make of Luna and Atlas, whether he too had formed unexpected alliances in his wild life that no human had witnessed. The truth was, for all our cameras and collars and careful observation, the wild kept its deepest secrets. As she turned off the lights and headed home, Margaret made a mental note to check the nursery cameras. 3 new orphaned kittens had arrived that week, their mother killed by rat poison. The cycle continued. Tragedy and hope, loss and redemption, the expected and the unbelievable, all woven together in the complex tapestry of wildlife conservation. The story of Luna and Atlas became legend among wildlife rehabilitators, a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is create space for the impossible to happen. It challenged protocols, upset conventional wisdom, and ultimately enriched our understanding of what wildness really means. Not just the absence of human influence, but the presence of endless possibility. In the years that followed, Margaret would rescue and release dozens more bobcats. Some followed traditional patterns, establishing solitary territories and living the independent lives described in wildlife textbooks. But occasionally, just occasionally, she would get GPS data or camera trap footage showing unexpected partnerships, brief alliances, or territorial arrangements that didn't quite fit the established patterns. Each time she thought of Luna and Atlas, somewhere out there in the Carolina mountains, living proof that nature still had surprises in store for those willing to look, to risk, and to believe that saving one life, or 4, could reveal truths that might help save them all. The work continued, exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Because that's what wildlife rehabilitation is. A leap of faith repeated daily. A stubborn insistence that every wild heartbeat matters. And a front-row seat to miracles that unfold in the space between human compassion and wild resilience. Margaret Sullivan had risked everything to save one bobcat, then 3 more, then countless others. And in return, they had given her something unbelievable. A glimpse into the secret flexibility of the wild, the bonds that transcend species expectations, and the enduring truth that in conservation, as in life, the most important discoveries often come from the cases that don't follow the rules.